I don't think there's that many books on observability specific to Kubernetes. There are books about, I think, the networking aspects and things like that. When you did the research, there, and you mentioned that you wanted to bring real world examples. When you did research, you found some gaps in the books that are out there. Some of them are monitoring Kubernetes, but what are the gaps that you found? Either like outdated content, or they were not updated to the latest practices. Maybe they didn't mention OpenTelemetry at all. They were written for OpenTelemetry, or maybe they didn't have like real examples. They had like concepts and theory, and not like where were the gaps that you found in the other ones that maybe you brought here?
Yeah, I think like that's a great question. Let me see. Switch my mic. Okay. Yeah. When it comes to observability, for to your point, there are like Kubernetes, as we all know, exposes a lot of information out of the box, right? Like, you simply can scrape the pod endpoint, services endpoint. Uh, that piece we are already aware of. But often, sometimes the challenge doesn't lie in collecting the signals or getting insights. It's correlating the signals, right? Um, Whatever I checked, like, had everything like metrics, logs, traces. You can do things. This is how you build dashboards. That piece is covered. But how do you correlate these signals? Because for me, an efficient triage is a good balance between metrics, logs, traces. There should be some kind of a correlation happening. Can we add more, like more emphasis on how we can correlating it? Yes, we want to start with what is Kubernetes, what is observability, why does it matter, what are the different signals available, how do you collect these signals? But the actual benefit of uh, uh, reducing your, or I shouldn't say benefit, MTTI, MTTR, how would you bring down your mean time to identify and resolve any issues? That's like by effectively correlating that. I thought there was a I mean, there were books that talks about that, but I wanted to me personally, that's where I spend a lot of time understanding, like, how can I tap into, okay, now that I know the utilization, can I get the same information from the logs? Like, can I temporarily correlate, like, same timestamp, or what are the different correlation techniques I could follow to kind of get to the truth of the problem, or the root of the problem, and do it right. So I wanted to spend more time there, right? And as you can see in the book, that's why I focus more on how we can instrument it. Like, OpenTelemetry plays a huge role in this book. There are a couple of chapters just dedicated to OpenTelemetry, just to know
I saw
what
that. Yep.
telemetry is,
Chapter
how we can
5.
do
Yeah.
instrumentation, how we can do correlation. I talk about different correlation techniques. So, I started from the basics, like the fundamentals, and then I want to really focus on the correlation piece and getting insights without having to spend a lot of time. So, that was one of my focus area.
And then you explain here, right, that yeah, I think a lot of time is spent, and we're going to cover that. Well, the book covers that, right? People should get the book and read it. It's very dense book, and it talks the part of like the technical tools and practices, how to collect, right? And a lot of time spent on that. Like you need it. It's not like you don't. It's not less important or more important, but a lot of time is spent on collecting, um, and sometimes organizations just spend a lot of time collecting, but they never spend time like what are they going to do with it, like the things
Exactly.
that things that we collect. And you have things here of like, why do you need them, right? Ensuring reliability in running updates. Actually, this one is one that I'm passionate about, because I work on, actually we have a work, just to plug something. Vikram and me, we are going to be in DC next week. If you're in Washington DC, we have a workshop that includes Argo rollouts, and Argo rollouts is using metrics, like evaluations of like signals and things like that to do the rollout on doing metrics. And the overall platform engineering workshop has it, maybe the one that we're doing not, um, but also things that are business, right? This one is e-commerce and dynamic pricing, right? It's this observability for the app, right? Like this book is not just observability. Sometimes there's a lot of documentation of observability of like the worker nodes and the operating system of the nodes, and not the application, right? Which But can you talk a little bit more that? Do you have both in here in this part?
Absolutely. KPI is what I mean there. So many times it's just not your infrastructure metrics or application utilization, red metrics. We'll talk about red, latency signals, everything. But what I'm talking about here is the KPI. You should always align your observability signals to the business outcomes. That is how you should measure, or that is one of the strongest or the important criteria for measuring applications performance, right? For example, CPU utilization doesn't mean anything to your end customers. Having your page load up in less than 1 second is how they measure their success. So those kind of KPIs, we have to definitely collect them and have them, like build an alarm out of it, build a notification out of it. That is going to transform how you ensure that your application or your business is giving, your end customers are truly experiencing, enjoying accessing your application or enjoying whatever you serve, right? So that's what I talk about. Like, you have to be very, very specific to the application. And that is why I feel like oftentimes SREs, platform owners, have to spend time with the business, owners. They know that for this application, this is what I care about. And if this gets impacted, for example, like I said, the page load time less than a second, if it takes 2 seconds, that means I'm losing my customers. Can we build metrics, can we build insights based on the real business logistics, or the business
Value.
the KPIs values? Thank you so much. Yeah, and that's exactly what I mean there.
I find
Anyone
it,
of us, like, does anyone follow that trend? Like,
yeah,
because many
yeah,
times
I
I feel
find it
like,
interesting because, sorry, to
right,
interrupt. I find it interesting that conversation is actually really important for your team to decide where the business value lies. Actually gives your team a north star, even like when you decide what's the most valuable thing you provide your customers, which is the most important API there. It actually tells you a lot of things as well, like what you're trying to achieve as a team. um, yeah, very, very helpful exercise. But I also have a question. As platform owners, you might be buried on their layers of, access. Uh, Imagine, okay, the page load metrics, right? But like you, if your platform doesn't directly impact those metrics, how would you define the relativity around it, right? Like this is a tough topic, I say.
this is a very yeah, that's a great question. That's where instrumentation plays a key role, right? I mean, first of all, you as a business owner, your application team should be aware of those KPIs. It is really important that you expose those KPIs, right? If for some reason you don't know how to do that, get in touch with your platform team, because they are the experts. They already manage observability platform, they already own the infrastructure platform, they know how to kind of instrument it. They have various ways, like, you don't have to reinvent anything. There are like, if and I'm just throwing out a couple of terms that don't want to go too deep into this, but there are auto instrumentation SDKs, there are like manual instrumentation SDKs. You don't have to always go change your codes. Rather, if you can just enable the auto instrumentation SDKs, you pretty much get all those KPIs. But there could be scenarios where you'll have to manually instrument them, and that's where you can leverage the help from your, platform team, right? If
Hmm.
you're not comfortable doing that, at least you should be critical in telling that these are my success criterias. Can we enable them? Can we expose them?
Yeah, also, I
And
guess your
oftentimes
services
I've seen,
criticality will
right,
tell a lot of things, right?
exactly. And oftentimes I've seen, like, some of, at least a few of the customers that I've interacted with, they come up with a whole package. They have the application deployments, right, packaged as Helm charts. Together, they also have their relevant recording rules, alert managers configured. So you as a platform owner manage, let's say, Prometheus, Thanos, Cortex, everything is there. But if you can also provide them the alert manager config, they don't even have to do anything. They just simply deploy that, and that particular alert specific to your application is already created. And credit goes to the application team, because it knows that these are my success criterias, and I've already exposed them. And not only I expose them, but I also created rules and config, so that you have to simply port them, deploy them, and the alerts are already in place. I get notified directly when something goes wrong. So it's kind of a good collaboration between the app owners and the platform team. Sometimes I feel like. Do you have any other thoughts? Like, people feel free to chime in if you are using the same criteria. Like, if you do a different way. Uh,
But the I think you have here on the resiliency, right? That I was saying that I think most of the time once you have the KPIs or the metrics for the application, it's resiliency. Like they want the app to be up and running and successful, and then comes to the infrastructure. It's the infrastructure resilience. Can you talk a little bit about the resiliency uh, complexity here on like you have this section here, right?
yeah.
Is
So
it resiliency about the making your application resilient, or monitoring how resilient or measuring how resilient is your application? You
it
have a
talks
Web3
about the
application
application
example here.
application resiliency, exactly, folks. So you'll have to always prepare for the worst, right? Like, uh, you have your application, making you've already deployed them across, multiple zones. They are up and available. You should always expect something fails at some point. So what I'm talking about here is, are there ways to isolate or identify that issues? Let me give you an example. Let's say you have deployed the application across three availability zones. And again, I'm using a term that's very specific to AWS, but availability
The
zones
data
are
centers, yeah, yeah.
data centers. Yeah, let's say data centers, and your applications are fine, but momentarily, right? Like, not always, but every now and then there is a user reporting slowness, right? You never know what's happening, right?
It's
This
not
is
down,
where
but it's low, and slow is the new down.
exactly, exactly, there could be one data center that can be like, having some kind of an issues, right? What I mean here is, can we collect metrics group by those zones? Kubernetes has this lovely concept of all this, metrics available. In addition, it also provides the labels, the necessary labels. Can you build some insights grouping the information, like for example your 5xx error codes by the zone, right? So even if one of those zones goes down, like, hey, you know what, I'm getting a constant 5xx from the zone A, because this user is going to that zone and he's like, facing slowness and eventually getting routed to the other zones. And there, among those three zones, there is one zone which is faulty or having some kind of a performance issues. And if you can just get those information specific to the zone, it could be a latency information, it could be the overall duration, right? It could be a 5xx, 4xx, you name it, right? That can help you isolate those impacted zones. And then you could have like, recovery disaster, I wouldn't say disaster recovery, but a backup strategy wherein like you can safely remove those affected pods, deployments, uh, from that impacted zone to a healthy zone, thereby giving your end users, uh, good experience, good customer experience. That's what I mean there.
So moving along, I think we covered the chapter 3 about the like why you want to measure, right? To keeps up running, to get insights, like you mentioned, of like what what is happening, that sometimes we're getting problems, right? And it's, you look at the dashboard. One thing that you mentioned and not highlighted was centralized observability, right? It could be, in our case, we said you can have one cluster with multiple availability and the nodes will be in different zones, but you can have regions, right? You can have a cluster in one region, another one, to send them then centrally, so you can have the single pane of glass. That's also important. So moving into chapter 4, it talks about golden signals. And for folks that have been in the book club, in the last book, we talk about golden signals in platform engineering, like golden path. Oh
Golden
no, no,
paths, yeah.
golden path, right?
Yeah.
Um, so is that related to golden path, or is it a terminology in the industry, or is it a makeup term that you have in this book, golden signals?
We call it the pillars of observability. The golden signals is just like, I just came up with that. The three pillars of
That's cool.
observability is what we call, right? Uh, exactly, that's goal. And what I focus on this particular chapter, or in this chapter, is metrics, logs, traces. I just wanted to introduce the readers to those three signals, because many times, even like I've felt this, people nowadays are very much like, right from the beginning, logs were like, everyone knew what log was, what they can do with logs. Slowly metrics kind of made its way out. Everyone today know what metrics is and how they can utilize the metrics, thanks to Prometheus and the innovations happening there. But not many do tracing today, because they don't know how to handle the trace, because the amount of trace that gets generated from right when you instrument your applications is huge. And even though when you do sampling, by the way, sampling is how you can, drop some of those traces and only collect those traces that means a lot. For example, traces that contains 5xx matters the most compared to the 2xx. So can we do some kind of a sampling to safely remove those 2xx traces and just collect 5xx, right? So people do sampling, but on top of that, even after doing sampling, it's a lot. So oftentimes I hear from customers that, oh yeah, we do metrics and logs, not a lot with traces. Do they add any value, is what I
Yeah.
constantly hear. So I wanted to provide equal. So it's always an equal balance between metrics, logs, and traces. And I wanted to introduce readers to like the benefits of enabling metrics, what kind of information you collect from metrics, what are those information that you collect from logs, and how can you make it easy, right? Because logs can also be, huge. So we talk about centralized logging architecture, how you can just have a centralized way where you can just collect the logs that you want and safely ignore others, and also introduce them to traces. Like when I say traces, I go way down to the fundamentals. Like I explain what a trace is, what a span is, what a parent ID is, how to kind of prepare a mental model around traces, right? Like, you go to a e-commerce site, order something, you start this transaction, that's a trace. After that, whatever individual actions you do, like adding item to your cart, checking out that item, it's all spans, right? So how the relationship between trace and span makes sense, what are the metadata that gets passed, and how they can be useful when you're actually troubleshooting it. So we go to that level, and we talk about the importance of metrics, logs, traces, and how you should always treat them as a equal balance, not don't rely on one signal too much versus the other, right? So
Yeah,
that's
the
the intention.
Trinity. So I'm going to share a book that changed my life, right, I guess, in that year. In 2019, this book called Mastering Distributed Tracing. I don't know if you read it, but I read it. I remember in 2019. Um, it's the best. At least it's the best. It's written by the person that created Jaeger, Yuri. What's his last name? I met him. It's a Yuri Shukuro, which also got involved into the creation of. He created Jaeger, and he created helped create OpenTelemetry and move the Jaeger stack into Hotel. But he wrote this book, and he at that time he was working with Uber, so it tells the Uber story of how they
Yes.
use master distributed tracing at scale, and all the things that I know today about tracing, which like Vikram mentioned, like why you're not using tracing, why you not, if monitoring is the trinity, right, logs, metrics, and tracing, and everybody has in the slides, and you ask in production, like you have logs, okay, for um forensics. Logs is not for alerting, like that's what I think I learned. Metric is for alerting. Do you use in tracing as the third one? We haven't got to that one. Like, when are you going to get to that one? This book, it's amazing. Like, not I didn't knew anything about tracing. I didn't know what a trace was, what a sampling was, because I kept hearing like Zipkin a lot, and I think Jenkins, and then Open Census in that time frame. I don't know. I'm dating myself. Open Census, Jenkins, and I was reading the three of them, and I was doing consulting in the other cloud provider I used to work for. So they asked me to do SRE consulting, and but that tracing was the area where I like. I'm not sure which one is the right to use or why to use it and all these things. Once I read this book, it made sense, and I saw in this book about from Vikram that he actually covers it. He explains what it is. He explains why it's needed and what is the purpose to have it. So it's equally. I don't know if it's equally important as the other two, but they're very important. So in the book, it talks about that. So I can sense that you're very passionate about tracing. I don't know. It's because the same thing as me is like the thing that people are not doing, right? Like, oh, you're doing metric, okay, fine. Doing logs, okay. we're not using tracing. Like, what? Wait, stop a
Yeah.
minute. Like, why you're not using tracing?
Tracing is really
Carlos,
important,
Carlos,
Carlos. Go ahead,
before we
Sylvia.
move on, we have questions pouring in.
Okay, go ahead.
Didn't we cover that book in the book club? The Mastering Distributed Tracing book is asked by Vinod.
No, I don't think so.
And have you read? Then maybe we should. Okay, let's
It's a
go.
very dense book. If well, let's see. If people are hardcore with this one, observability and Kubernetes, then maybe that's the next one. But this
Yeah.
this book covers tracing. I was
Yeah.
reading the chapter.
Yes. Because see, many times, like I said, signals can be huge, and you know what's happening in your application, but trace is where you can actually get to the root cause of the problem. Uh, Hundreds of microservices, thousands of microservices. When are we going to identify where the actual problem was? Right. So trace kind of gives you the service map, this mental model on like what is the request duration like, response duration like. Do you see any issues with any of specific microservices, right? And that's exactly that's where like you talk about mean time to identify. Like how can I reduce the mean time to identify any issues? And that's exactly when you have the traces. And I do get the point. Like it could add additional overhead to your application, especially when you are manually instrumenting your applications, because it's going to consume some resources. And that's
Oh,
why we talk about some of the sampling strategies, what you can apply, how you can ignore some of them, do a probabilistic sampling, or like there are like various approaches that we talk about in this book. And not only we talk about them, but also introduce readers to start instrumenting their applications, right? Like there is a code bundle that I think the link is in the book, where you can just simply download the sample application. And there is also this manual instrumentation piece where you enable the application for instrumentation, meaning like you make them emit custom metrics, and also apply some probabilistic sampling to see like if I can remove the I don't need the 2xx data. Like 2xx data can be sampled like 90 percentage, but when it comes to the error like 4xx and 5xx, I want like 2%, 1%. I don't want to sample the data at all. Like I need the data, right? There are like various approaches we talk about.
yeah. I think we'll get to that point when we talk about tracing, because there's a lot
Right.
of terminology about tracing, right? The sampling is like, do you collect every transaction, also baggage? Like what are you going to include in that trace? But let's talk a little bit about metrics here. Red metrics. Now we have metrics with colors, red, yellow, and green, or what is this red metrics? And it's red metrics, and I think the next one, because it's cut off. Um, yeah, the red metrics. I think these are.
Yes.
I
Red
think it's cut
metrics. Red
off. I think,
stands
yeah.
for request, errors, and duration. Right. So how do you measure your application success? How many requests does it handle? Right. Can it handle like 100 out of 100 requests it gets? Does it get throttle? If it gets throttle, how many are reported as errors? Like out of the 100 requests, two of them errored out. Still, that's a huge one, right? Like, even though you have a 98%, you would want to be like 99.99999% available, right? Like depending on how your organization has defined their measure of success. And the duration, it's okay, you get the connection to your application, but you shouldn't be there for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. How fast can you finish your transaction? How well resourced your application is to handle the load, handle the request, making sure that it gives you the response in the expected time. That is all is the red metrics is all about, right? Like there are it is like many times I get asked, okay, you say metrics, you say logs, you say traces, what are the right metrics for me? Imagine I don't have any custom metrics or the KPIs that my application tells.
Yeah. Seb is saying that the golden signals is a terminology that Google has for the like you have here, right? The golden signals measure the
What exactly
latency, which measures the
do
latency,
they look
traffic,
like?
and error, which is the next
Exactly.
one, right? These are the golden signals. The other ones was the red, which is um
These are two different
it's like
approaches. You
it's a service, right?
can
It's
go
it's
with
a
red
service,
or
right?
the golden signals. You're right.
And then you have things like saturation, right? I think
Right.
saturations come a little bit. This is the one that I think a lot of people starts with, right? It's very easy to check how's the CPU collected, like C advisor and those, I think you mentioned in previous chapters, collecting the saturation, which is the CPU, the memory utilization, like how bogged down it is. But the other ones are the ones that it's going to give you the symptom, right? Measuring the symptom versus maybe because sometimes the cause to that symptom, like stuff is slow, right? Or you get errors because you take too much time to timeout. But it's because the saturation. You're not
That service is already
measuring,
saturated.
maybe.
Exactly. So, saturation is a good indicator of whether you're properly applications, because you baseline your applications and then your application hits the market. It's very good. Like people start pouring into your application. Do you periodically baseline your applications? Do you account for the increase in your traffic? So you'll have to properly resource it, right? So saturation is a good indicator that oh, your application is always saturated 90% of the time, 80% of the time. That means that's a good indicator for the application owners to start baselining their applications again. And if they want to increase the resources, that's where you start with.
And I like the table that you added, right? The aspect or the area where, yeah, both can be done, can be used, right? Like granularity, like the aspect of granularity. Actually, yeah, you open, nice. It says provides deeper insights into the individual requests, right? But it's missing the holistic system view. But in
That's
golden signals, that's
exactly
where you're going to see the high level
saturation.
overview of
Hmm.
the service, right? So, and like you mentioned, a lot of the apps that run in Kubernetes are microservices, and in essence, for people that are like maybe new in to Kubernetes, that are getting started into Kubernetes, that are present here, right? Microservices is basically when you're deploying in Kubernetes, it's like two different deployments or pods talking to each other. So you were talking about like, yeah, my service is slow, like the web store app is slow, but there to do something in the app, like there's like three pods communicating to each other. So one, you hit the first pod, hit the second one, hit the third one. That's a transaction that goes along. You need the trace, right,
Right.
to go over. But when you are doing golden signals, you're not measuring the three microservices. You're measuring is the web store like
Yes,
KPI. Is it
as an
slow or
application.
not? Or a
That's right.
transaction like adding something to the card or going through payments. Is it slow? So that's golden signals. And then you go down into red on one microservice, right? One of the pods or the deployment is like, yeah, the container is doing too many requests, or if there's errors happening on that granularity, right? Like I think both are
You
useful.
nailed
Some
it.
people ask like, do I use golden signals or I use red signals? Like you're asking me because like you're going to pay for one and not the other one, or like you want to like both are important, right?
Totally.
And you have some of the examples on I think this is Grafana, right? Or not?
Yeah, it's Grafana. It's just
Okay.
that how can you understand requests like red metrics, and how do you define? Because there is nothing like red metrics. You'll have to define for every application. There could be a request rate, there could be an error rate, there could be a overall duration. So you'll have to come up with the right query, right metric, and build the red dashboard. Right. It's a matter of you know slicing and dicing the signals. You already have the signals, but you now have to focus on the red metrics. So how can I write the
Ah,
right prompt QL to come up with that visualization?
yeah.
Go ahead.
So let's talk about something interesting. Like we don't find books. Usually the book club is for to talk about things that are like not in the book.
Okay.
That are interesting, right? So who can tell me in the chat what are we looking here in this chart? These are metrics: request, process time, service work queue. What service is this? If somebody can recognize,
It says at the top.
yeah, what is it? Say it.
Isn't it API server?
What
I'm sorry,
API server? What is the API server?
too small to read for me.
I think you can zoom now. So
EKS, yeah.
yeah. So this is not a cluster running on premise or in your server. So why do you care if this thing is slow or not?
Oh,
This is
that's a
a
good
managed
question.
service.
That's a good
This is
That's
question.
a
computers that Carlos is running on your behalf and giving you Kubernetes, a
Carlos is,
managed
yeah,
Kubernetes, right?
telling you to use.
Me and
Yeah.
Vikram are in charge of running this service. Is my problem that it's slow, or is it your problem? It's a shared
That's a good question.
responsibility, right, Vikram? So this is why
Exactly.
we give these metrics, right? I give you a server, but if the clients, and then what are the clients to this service? Our cert manager, all the Kubernetes controllers that you install, Istio, cert manager, external DNS, Argo CD. Argo CD is very heavy, crossplane. Like what else? All these things that you install in Kubernetes, they're hitting this API server and getting bogged down. So it's a shared responsibility. And give you an API server to a certain degree, we can auto scale it, but we have to be a shared responsibility. You cannot just have something that do a denial of service against this. It's an instance that you're paying for. We maintain it. So that's something that when you go into, and this I'm mentioning AWS, the other cloud providers offer this type of managed service. So when you run Kubernetes on the cloud for production, these are the type of things that you need to be aware. And you as an SRE in charge of multiple managed Kubernetes clusters, these are some of the monitoring that you have to do. Any comments or questions? Or Vikram, you want to add something?
Yeah, to give you some numbers, each API server can only take 600 simultaneous calls. And we all know that different controllers, different components in Kubernetes interacts with API server. Now, there could be a chatty client who always makes a lot of tons of call, and that can in turn affect the other folks, right, who's trying to communicate. So to Carlos' point, having visibility to these metrics gives you a good way, good understanding of like who's communicating with their API server, how many calls do they issue, and again, going back to the overall availability of your applications, right? It implicitly, it indirectly affects that. So having visibility to these metrics matters.
Yep. That's it. They're out. And these metrics, usually the managed providers give you this out of the box, super easy to get them. Um, you don't have to do anything. So the next one is Prometheus. Let's talk a little bit about Prometheus. Is it Prometheus? Yeah, maybe clarify for some folks. I don't know if people has questions. Maybe I'll add a dumb one, or maybe Sevi, and Sevi doesn't have dumb questions. I'll be the one usually dumb questions. Like people hear Prometheus and Thanos, or maybe just talk about Prometheus. Is Prometheus a server that you send metrics into? Is Prometheus something that you install and emits metrics? Like, isn't that a little bit confusing for folks when they get started? They hear
Yeah,
Prometheus and like, what? What is the role of Prometheus? What it is it collecting? Is it emitting? Is it processing? Like, what is the role of
got it.
Prometheus?
So folks, observability from a metrics standpoint has three phases. First, you instrument your application to emit metrics. Second, you collect the metrics. Third, you store the metrics. And then comes the visualization piece, right? Once you store the metrics, you can visualize them. Now, where Prometheus comes is Prometheus has different components. It has SDKs that can help you in instrumentation. So you could use the Prometheus SDKs to instrument your applications for metrics. So that is a component of Prometheus. Prometheus holistically is like you can say it's like a
Instrumentation. That's
service
the when we talk about instrumentation. That's the
that
area.
provides multiple features. You're right. So it can help in instrumentation. Prometheus also has this mode where it can help you scrape the information. We all know that metrics are available from a Kubernetes endpoint. So you need someone who can go scrape these endpoints and collect the metrics. Prometheus can do that. Prometheus also has a backend where you can reliably store the metrics. So means like let's say you deploy the Prometheus with the persistent volume. So all your metrics can be stored inside Prometheus
Is it a
itself.
database or a type of database?
It's a real time series database. Yes,
Time
it's a
series
time series
database.
database. So you could do instrumentation, you could do scraping, you can also do storage. But many times people don't store metrics within Prometheus because if the Prometheus pod goes down, what's going to go down, right? So they prefer a reliable storage unit like Thanos or Cortex. That's where the Prometheus metrics get stored, right?
I
And
see.
these
Word.
these services have inbuilt features like deduplication. It kind of compresses the old time series database so that it also you don't have to spend a lot on storing these matrices, right? So that is that. So long story short, Prometheus can do instrumentation. It can scrape the metrics, and it can also help you store the metrics.
Yeah.
Does that
And yeah,
does that
the book has an example of like instrumenting with a gauge. And I think you mentioned like what are the type of things that you do, like
different types of
gauge, a histogram,
Prometheus metrics? Uh-huh.
that histogram goes by buckets. and then logs. Let's talk before we end. Let's talk a little bit about logs. I'll give you maybe an overview of logs. I hear sometimes, most of the time on the field, that people want to do monitoring and alerts and they want logs. Like, is that an anti-pattern? Like, I was an SRE and I discovered at that time, I just give you a story. Maybe you can give me a story. At the time I was doing SRE, I was troubleshooting an incident. We got alerts and we went to, I think we were using Elk. It doesn't matter. I went to the logs to troubleshoot, and why we were getting, and I was looking at the logs of like 12 hours ago. And it was so much logs coming in that they always were delayed 6 hours. So I couldn't do anything as an SRE with my logs. There were I was only accessing or index these logs. I just got 6 hours. I don't know if that's true today. Maybe is it, but is logs for alerts and monitoring, or like what is the role of logs on this trinity?
Logs is more for identifying where the problem is, understanding the root cause of the problem. And yes, that stands true even today. Logs are huge, Carlos. That's why there are like so many features that gets built on top of logs. To your point, like, visualizing the logs, having some kind of an insights ability to run insights query on top of logs. Otherwise, you're gonna, within a blink of the eye, logs can quickly fill, and you don't know what you're looking at, and you cannot understand the root cause of the problem. And that's exactly where correlation comes in. With correlation, you get the timestamp. We call it temporal correlation. Can I compare this timestamp of the metric or the trace with the timestamp of the logs and see like what exactly is happening? Can I match the metadata? So you'll have to do some kind of an analytics on top of logs, and that's when it's powerful. When you can do this analytics, combine the information, correlate the signals together, then you can get to the bottom of the problem.
Savi, are you going to mention something? There's
No,
a
I was
question
waiting
from.
for when the AI will be mentioned here, making sense
I,
of logs.
insights, I kind of gave it away.
Insights.
Log
Yeah.
insights is kind of a AI.
Actually, there's MCP servers to access manage Prometheus and get a query.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
I guess that's Saif, do you have a question? I think I saw a hand
Yes,
coming up.
good afternoon. Good morning for you. I have a question regarding the metrics because one of the things that I am always struggling when I start a system from scratch for the metrics is to choose between a pull or push system. Like there are both
Uh,
options, but
or push.
sometimes, yeah, you open internet and both defend each point of view. Sometimes you just go with the thing that everyone in the team agrees, which is Prometheus usually, but sometimes you want it to be collection if you want to use some data collector or something. But yeah, if you can give us
Pull,
your
pull
So
versus
the
push.
way,
And yeah.
yeah, yeah, the way you can easily get to the right method is whether it's a long running container or a short running container. Because when you scrape the metrics, you define a scrape interval. So the first interval, let's say it's 30 seconds. The first scrape goes 30 seconds, 30 seconds. The next scrape is going to come in the 1 minute mark. And within 1 minute mark, 30 to 60, like 10 containers can come and easily vanish, right? You don't want to, you'll easily lose those metrics. So a good rule of thumb is if it's a short running container, you might have to run push gateways along with Prometheus so that these applications can push the metrics to the push gateway, and then the push gateway can send it to the Prometheus. But if these are long running containers, I mean, you're very well off with having a pull model. Does that help?
Yeah. Saif.
yeah, Bevy. I struggle every time to unmute
Yep.
myself.
By
Yeah,
default, yeah, it's running. Usually, you have web apps, right? If you're talking about web services, you have containers long running, and they're running a lot. Is scrape is what I see everywhere. It's more efficient scraping, because then the person scraping takes honor on how often, how slow today, right? To scrape, and you don't have to shut down the app or change the app in case of push. Is the app is the one that is pushing. So like Vikram said, I'll say one example, like in Argo workflows, it's basically a pod that dies, it completes for a job that is going to do work and then stop. So it needs to send that information somewhere about the metrics
yeah, exactly.
that it has, right? And I think I heard, right, Vikram, I don't know, I heard when I was doing Knative that the push gateway, I think it was an issue around timings, that the correlation of the times that you things got pushed, it wasn't sent, and the timings that that metric show up, it could be a problem around push
Out of
gateways in
time, out of
Prometheus.
date.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
out of sync with
Yeah.
the with of the times. Just funny anecdote. Did everyone notice that the universal language for the word scrape is like going like this? Like Rickon did the same thing that I did. You scrape. If you hear like, I think there's something in this observability space that everybody says that you scrape. Basically, you're doing a slash, right? You do a slash metrics, like you do
Yeah.
an HTTP request get on slash. And I tend to see myself doing it, talking to end users, and I saw Vikram doing like, then I'm not the only one that you scrape.
Right.
um, we'll do one more question, and then we'll have to go. Hi, Christian. Go ahead, ask your question.
Uh, Often, I know we are coming from an application perspective here. So we at TSYS are a credit card processing platform. So we run into scenarios where, yes, we need to reduce the mean time to identify and recover. But we run into needle in the haystack scenarios with the platform itself, meaning like we have to correlate some external systems like DynamoDB latencies or network latencies and everything. And some of these things don't have the trace IDs or they don't correlate uh, within the ecosystem. So how do you approach these kind of things? Because I understand the business alarm. Yes, we need to identify that the latencies are there and everything, but this is sort of like in the entire ecosystem, a component running slow
Yeah.
can cause a detrimental effect. But how do we go ahead and determine that and make it part of our observability? Because you can't correlate, you'll just have some very top level metrics for ourselves.
That's a great question. And yes, you'll have to have a standard framework to instrument your signals. And that's why I kind of paid a lot of focus on telemetry. I know you mentioned data trace, like, if you can have applications running or developed using different languages, but what's good with OpenTelemetry is that it provides SDKs for almost all of these languages. All you have to do is just instrument them, use the manual or the auto instrumentation, and it makes sure that you get the correlation piece figured out. But to your point, when you're using a third party, things get a little tricky. So I think you'll have to make a conscious design-based decision that when you start up your application, when you design your applications, you have to have your observability team there. Like when you're introducing too many tools, like they should be able to tell you that, okay, if you do that, tomorrow there could be some issue when you try troubleshooting the issues. I think these are some of the things that you could do when you design your application itself. But I do get the